Hello, everyone. Okay, we're going to get back at this and we're going to talk about chapter three. Now, chapter three has a lot of material associated with biology, and we're going to talk a lot about brain chemistry, and we're going to talk a lot about all the different systems, and it might be confusing. So it's okay to take a step back. I even have my own notes sitting right over here because it's been a minute since I was in biology class, right? Um, and so I'm going to go ahead and go through this as effectively as I can. But if you have questions, please don't hesitate to ask because I know that this chapter especially feels like a little bit of a lot of information that's not necessarily in your typical social science course. All right. So we're going to understand essentially the affect or the way in which our body is affected by emotions and behaviors and social interactions, right? We're going to talk about our well being. We're going to talk about our overall mental health. We're going to talk about the things that stress us out. And then we're going to talk about how all of these things impact the body. Okay. So let's get started. Again, I know this goes into a lot of in depth, but the first kind of example I think that they gave um, in your textbook is about the what is it about? Oh, it's about the financial crisis. So we're going to get into that in just a second to kind of give us a head start on what we're talking about. But this is just kind of a overarching again to kind of help you out. Again, I'm not going to read these slides to you. We're gonna talk about it though. So there were a lot of emotional consequences that led to a lot of mental health issues when we talk about the financial crisis, because anytime we talk about major financial gain or major financial loss, um, and or the just instability of your financials in general, that can put a lot of undue stress, right? It can also add in an element of fear and a lot of other things. So we're gonna talk about the way the 2008 financial crisis kind of went through that. Uh, First of all, it triggered an initial fear, right? That emotional response that really got to us at the very beginning was fear, and it created anxiety and panic in the general public, despite the fact that for most people that weren't investing in the stock market in that particular moment, um, the long term cost when it came to say investing in housing or how much their house was worth, all of, or whether or not they could keep paying their loans that were a certain way, didn't come till a little bit later. But that fear definitely led to some irrational behavior. It also led to a lot of very emotional reactions. The media, as it's one to do, likes to amplify fear and uncertainty because anytime there's a fear and uncertainty within the public, they continue to tune in to these news sources. Now, we're seeing certain trends that that's not always the case now, and that's just because there are a lot of people saying I need to tune out for myself for a minute. I need to step back for a second and not get amplified by that. And or there's been a lot of uproar of people saying, hey, this is not the way to give us these informations because we can't live in this constant state of fear. It's not good for us. Um, and then there was widespread emotional impact, right? So if you have fear that's then compounded by more fear, you're going to end up with a certain levels of anxiety. Your well-being in just general is going to go down. You're going to see a lot of um, when you saw a lot of job losses, there was a lot of stress involved. There was a lot of health implications. There was definitely mental health implications, and all of these things kind of came down the line out of this fear and the stress of this particular situation. And so, any kind of social context that affects you in a social way, like a financial crisis. And this is a really big example that affected a lot of people, but a social interaction to a degree or an interpersonal relationship can also have some of these kind of effects. And we'll talk about that as we move on. All right. So when we talk about the way in which our body or our brain, I guess, impacts our body, we're going to talk about two things. We're going to talk about our mood and how that impacts our essential general demeanor. And then we're going to talk about our emotions. What emotion we feel will come at us differently depending on what mood we're in, right? So I can deal with my youngest, you know, getting angry at me and maybe not saying the nicest thing if I'm in a more relaxed mood than say if I'm super stressed or if I don't feel good, right? Because whatever mood I am in that particular moment is going to also impact how I perceive whatever it is, whatever emotion I am feeling about a social setting. And that's kind of one example, but it happens on the other way too, right? So if I'm in a really stressed out mood, my partner could come up to me and say something really sweet to me, and I'm not going to be beaming like maybe I would if I was in a good mood, right? These things can have positive and negative effects depending on where your mood is, and those emotions can then also impact how your mood stays or your mood for maybe the next social interaction. Okay, and we'll kind of, again, it's a lot of a feedback loop, but also we can talk about well-being as a way to essentially break that feedback loop and hopefully help ourselves cope with some of the harder emotions and or even the degree to which some of the more pleasant ones um maybe we don't want those manic reactions either where we're like, oh my gosh, this is the most exciting thing in all of time. Like, now that can be good, but if you go straight from a mood that is very negative into that mood, that can cause some distress within the body, and we'll talk about kind of the consequences of that. All right, so we're going to talk about the nervous system here for just a second. Our sympathetic nervous system is going to be the nervous system that part of the autonomic, there we go, nervous system that is linked to preparing the body to respond to threats. So this is like the get up and go, right? This is the stuff that's ready. It's going to be where your pupils dilate. It's going to increase your heartbeat. Um, it's going to inhibit your digestive activity. It's going to start those sugar responses. Like let's bump. We're getting ready to fight, or we're getting ready to run, but there's something's going to happen, and we got to be prepared, right? And that's what that part of your nervous system does. On the opposite side, your parasympathetic nervous system, it's there to essentially calm you down. That's going to be when your pupils contract. You're going to slow your heartbeat. You're going to stimulate digestive activity. And essentially what that's doing is saying, okay, we're relaxed. We can be in a way in our body that doesn't require us to be on guard or to be reactive. And so when we get stuck in either one of these things, it can cause both issues in the body, but it can also cause issues within our social constructs, right? So if we stay guarded and ready to fight at every single interaction, then when you're going to have an interaction with, say, maybe a little kid or your dog, and you're going to overreact because you're guarded, you're ready to go, and that is going to lead you into a situation where you're not going to get necessarily what emotion you were really feeling or what you were trying to say is going to come off very differently. On the flip side, if you stay with your parasympathetic nervous system and you're always just constantly down, then you're not going to maybe be prepared in a situation where there's a threat, or you're not going to be able to engage socially in a situation that may be really fun, right? You still have to kind of amp yourself up sometimes to go and socially interact. And if you are choosing not to do that, or your body's not doing that, then there can be serious consequences for that. And then as we're going to talk about the amygdala, which is just essentially part of the limbic system, geez, words, which includes a lot of different brain structures, one of them being the amygdala that regulates essentially our emotions or our perceptions, our reactions to particular types. Again, we want to regulate our emotions. So when we have something wrong with our amygdala, or when we are not functioning with good health or good mental health, then these things can be really dysregulated, and that can lead to a lot of other problems, which we'll get into here in a minute. Oh, well, we just did all this. Look at that. All right. Okay, so I put this lovely, cute icon of our inside out characters over here, and when we're talking about basic and secondary emotions, because honestly, the movies did a fairly good job of talking about the difference between kind of our basic emotions and then how we get into more complex emotions and how those things change. Really, our basic emotions, again, if you want to think about Inside Out, the first movie, you're going to have anger, fear, sadness, disgust, and happiness, right? Now, there are, I think there's another one that I can't remember. Hold on. But primarily, you could look at those five and really think, hey, okay, I get it. These are the five that are there. Now, when we have reactions to stimuli, especially as we get older, right? Because we're talking about adults for the most part in this course, or especially when we're talking about this, we're going to see that those aren't the only emotions we feel, right? Or we're going to feel a different variety of fear or a different variety of disgust. Maybe the disgust is about really about concern for health or what have you, or maybe we're embarrassed, or maybe we're feeling, let's see, amused, or we're feeling content. All of these things can be more complex because they're not just simply content, would not just simply be happiness, right? But we're also feeling safe and secure, and we're feeling stable. I don't know. There's more to it than just those simple five, right? You're going to feel more complex emotions. And sometimes you're going to feel those secondary emotions such as jealousy or guilt that are multiple of the original five, right? So that jealousy could come down to I might have a feeling of disgust towards myself for not meeting a specific standard. I might be angry at the person I am with and for expressing a certain level of appeal towards something that is not me. It may be a fear of losing, and all of those things combined have created that jealousy, right? Now, just because these things are complex doesn't mean that they don't have fairly simple or big consequences to our health, to our well-being, to our relationships, to a given social interaction. So if you go into a situation despite the emotions that you're feeling leading up to that jealousy, if that jealousy comes out in a burst of, say, anger towards the person that you are with, that's going to have a very different effect than saying, hey, I am feeling jealous because I am feeling afraid of losing you, or that I don't fit a standard that you are looking for, etc. That is going to probably get a very different reaction. So you're going to feel emotions, but how you then interpret them and react to them then have different social consequences. And we'll kind of, again, talk about that as we move through the course. So culture is also, and we talked a little bit about this in chapter 2, right? Is going to impact kind of how we express emotion, but also the emotions themselves. So there are certain emotions that certain cultures teach, and then there's other emotions that certain cultures don't teach. So you might go to a different country and maybe jealousy is not something that they feel because they do not feel a specific kind of ownership, or ownership's the wrong word, attachment to particular ideas of what they should be, or monogamy in general, or etc. So if their relationships are set up in a different way, then maybe jealousy is not something that they teach because there's not a place for it in their particular schema of what relationships should look like, right? And so again, we'll get into more how cultures vary and how things are different via different cultures, kind of as we talk about different biases, different judgments. As we get into different settings, those things change depending on where you are in the world and or even what time, right? Like how we interpret emotion is different now than say we would have done in the 1700s or we would have done prior to that. There are certain things that we do, and honestly, as we look at a more global world, we're going to see how some of cultural differences mute out or stand up depending on how they interact with other cultures, right? So if you are in a global situation like we are now, and we can communicate with people all over the world, the more we get into cultural differences, the more social interaction is going to change either in an assimilation or into an accommodation for those differences. We're either going to accommodate for them and leave room for them, or we're going to end up having a forced assimilation of some sort via cultures that may not be the majority of people or the majority of ideas. And those are going to get kind of muted out. And we'll see that global situation kind of impact their culture and change it. And that's happened repetitively, right? As we worked through um, the colonial spread of ideas, we see many, many, many cultures being erased or eradicated or changed a lot due to the cultural differences and the clashes that happened. And those social interactions and their long-term consequences were that forever some indigenous cultures were lost to us, and also the indigenous cultures that are still around were changed dramatically. um, and again, we'll get into this more as we go, but if you have questions on how that kind of happens, feel free to reach out to me. And then we also have gender norms, right? So gender norms, and again, there's also not just cultural and gender norms. We could get into a variety of other things, and we will as we move through the course. But I think these were the most poignant to for the book to lay out. Um, our gender norms affect how we express our emotions, right? If we are taught, say, as females, that we are not allowed to be as assertive, then when you sit in a boardroom like this picture is of, when you have a conversation, the men are more likely to be able to speak up or express dislike of something, or have more of that flight or fight response to something that they don't like, whereas women are going to use more of the, I think it's called tend and change or something, or accommodate. We'll get to that in just a second. But that's mostly because that's what's socially learned. And in some cultures, that may be different, right? But in America, those gender norms absolutely feed into what emotions you're allowed to express and what emotions um, you're not allowed to, depending on your gender. All right. We're going to talk about moods as kind of informal cues, right? So these things are there to not just tell us something is off or something has affected us, but they're also there to kind of prompt us to look at a situation more intently. So we talked about in chapter 2 how we have to make a lot of snap decisions because we can't process all of the information all at once. Well, our moods, especially as we look at something, are going to help us to decide what to key in on, what we need to focus on in a given circumstance, because it's not matching or because it's eliciting some kind of response. Okay. All right. Well, just because we have a mood or a feeling about something doesn't mean we're reading it necessarily correctly. So sometimes, because the way we tend to read other people is through facial expressions, through body um, posture, through just body language in general, through how we are feeling in a situation, we tend to not always get it right, right? We're going to look at somebody and we're going to misplace what it is they're feeling, or we're going to misunderstand it. And that's part of kind of social interaction, right? Is figuring out how to then continue the interaction, or how you want to do that after that particular conflict has been felt. But it also allows you to have more learning opportunities in a particular social context. So if you have social relationships that you have to create, like even if it's not like your interpersonal ones, maybe it's with a boss. So you're going to have to learn those cues. Even if you get them wrong, you still have to kind of learn them as you move forward in order to be successful in that particular work environment, right? And we're going to talk about how having those negative feelings impact your physical health as well. All right, right here, apparently, the interconnectedness of emotion, stress, and well-being. So, when we talk about stress, stress has a varied amount of impact on us, and it can go from anything to your increased heart rate or disrupting your heart rate in some way. Your breathing changes, your blood pressure increases, your body will begin to secrete adrenaline and other hormones. You might start sweating. Sugar is released into your body for energy because it's worried about that, need to get charged up, need to be ready. Your pupils will dilate. It'll impact your digestive tract. It will, hold on, trying to look at my notes. But you also have, in extreme cases, right? You have this long-term, when you have long-term issues with extreme stress, it can impact you in even more ways, and can lead to things like heart attacks, stroke, exhaustion, death. Again, we'll get more into that here in a minute. All right, so key factors that contribute to everyday stress. You're going to have those major impacts in your life. So maybe a lost love of a loved one, or maybe a significant change in your economic stability, etc. Those are going to be your more major events. You're also going to have those daily events, right? Those things like somebody cut you off in traffic, or you're going to, trying to think of other ones. You're going to have a really, really cranky person checking you out at the store. Like not checking you out, like making goo eyes at you, but like checking you out, like ringing you up. All of these things, these little bitty stressors that you feel, the big ones take a big toll, right? And they may last a while because, the grieving process lasts a long time, or maybe you have a health related something that you now have to kind of re-envision how you do things. That's going to change your life in a very big way. And then you're going to have these daily things, and sometimes those add up a lot too. And this chronic things can these chronic stresses, along with these little ones, can then impact your overall health and well-being in a lot of different varied ways. And we're going to get into kind of some more examples. Social interactions, whether they're a positive or a negative, also play a role, right? So again, some of your relationships can help you de-stress, right? You go and you decide you're going to go hang out with your best friend for a little while. Sometimes that can absolutely be the thing you need to kind of let some of that stress go and help your well-being. On the flip side, if you say go home and have an argument with your partner, that's going to trigger a different level of stress as well, right? That's going to add to that stress and have that negative impact. And so we have to kind of think about how we're moving into a social interaction, what mood we're in, what emotions we're feeling as we move into a social interaction, and work towards keeping our well-being and the well-being of others by essentially trying to figure out how to not essentially like take that out on the other people you're having social interactions with, or take the stressors that you're feeling into a particular interaction. And that's really hard to do. All right. So you have three different major phases in your stress. The first one is kind of an alarm. It's like saying, "Hey, we feel stress, and we're gonna get you prepared. We're gonna put you on guard, right?" And we've talked a lot about kind of what our body does to do that. The second stage is we're gonna be like, "Okay, wait a minute, we're still stressed," and you're gonna feel that resistance. Your body's gonna attempt to, kind of adapt to the stress, because maintaining large levels of that cortisol in your system, staying in that fight or flight mode for a very long time is very exhausting. And it's going to cause, your body to respond and say, "Hey, we need to kind of quit that for a minute." But if it goes longer, then what you're going to end up with is that exhaustion. You're in that prolonged stress that depletes your body of resources, and you feel fatigue, burnout, and you get very vulnerable to illnesses, even the common cold, right? You're going to be more likely to pick that up because your immune system is now um, enabled, or enabled, is now being affected by the amount of cortisol in your body. Okay. All right. So, okay. So, extreme events, I was going to say one of the ways we end up staying in these long-term stressful things is what you hear, something like PTSD, or in a situation where you're in a very seriously stressed state for a very long time post a traumatic event, or you are in a traumatic event consistently for a long time. So, say you are in a domestic violence situation and that has taken its toll because it's been with you for a very long time, or you've been in this relationship for an extended period of time. That stress is then going to lead you to a level of exhaustion, because there's never a point where you feel like you can not be on guard or not be ready, because that stress is constant. So PTSD forms as a long-term consequence of your body being presented with that feeling or need to be on guard. And that will kick up all of those actual bodily processes, whether or not you're in a situation you need it or not. And that's not to say that that PTSD is something you can control, because it's not always. But it's to say that these are the responses that then your body has, and it is a very much impacts your physical ability to fight off a cold, your physical ability to sleep, to eat sometimes. It impacts all of your health systems, and then causes severe health implications. All right, so chronic stress also can come from consistent relation conflicts, financial troubles, and that can lead to anxiety or depression or various other health issues like heart problems, immune response, etc. It doesn't have to be something big. It can be a bunch of really little things consistently that can get you to that place. And once you feel depression, you can also essentially kind of get in that feedback loop, because you have because that mood or that system is now trained to be this way, because those constants are still there, right? So you have a physiological response to stress that triggers, again, that cortisol. And because if it's happened too much, then the cortisol that's in your system does not have time to essentially work itself out. And you don't tend to get yourself into a regular digestive rhythm again, a regular sleeping rhythm, a regular immune response. All of these things are impacted by the level of cortisols in your system. All right. So your book talks a lot about the male response, female response, and kind of that being this is very geared towards an American or Eurocentric ideology. But it's also very common for the reverse to be the case, right? So having a fight or flight response to any kind of stress stimulus is not just a male response, right? Like you can have that as female. I know many females that would be in that case, depending on the different kinds of threats, you might react differently. And then depending on, like, say, what the stressor is, if you're walking down the street and someone's walking towards you, but they have maybe what looks like a weapon in your hand, your response is not likely, no matter what gender you are, to be a tend and befriend type response. You're more likely to get that kind of adrenaline pumping fear, fight or flight response. So while we talk about very close personal social interactions, this might be a gender dynamic, and that might be is likely based on social learning. Um, Overarchingly, it's going to depend on what the actual stressor is that's coming in and how to interact with it. Um, Now, say it's a fight in an interpersonal relationship, then there is going to be probably more of a likelihood that a female individual is going to want to do that tend and befriend kind of nurturing response. And that's just because from the gate, we construct gender in such a way in this country that females are supposed to be nurturing. They're supposed to try to fix it. They're supposed to be um, the ones that listen, right? The ones that help, the ones that are caregivers. And so that's going to create that response as something that's going to be kind of that learned behavior. Um, Now again, if you see, no matter who you are, if you see somebody coming at you with a knife with the intent of harm, I doubt very seriously that nurturing response is going to be the one that comes out of you. So there are exceptions, and I want to reiterate that because when we talk about something being gendered, it's misinformed to think that either source could not have this. In the same way, a father, a male father, is going to be able to use that tend and befriend, that nurturing response when it comes to his kids, right? And that's not something that just makes him female. It makes him creating a different response depending on what the stressor is. And so I want to again reiterate that these are not just male or just female responses. These are the ways in which we react to different kinds of stressors in different ways. All right, let's talk about depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety are both very prevalent in our society. And again, a lot of it tends to be a consequence of lots of stress and or maladapting coping strategies to stressors. Um, when you have either depression or anxiety, generally those will impact your own view of self in a way that will impact how you socially interact. And what I mean by that is if you are feeling that way, you are feeling either depressed or anxious, um, you are more likely to self criticize how you may enter into a social interaction and or avoid a social interaction because of a fear of how you may present yourself. These things then can cause a long-term um, concern or degradation to your social interactions. And so, and thus have lots of, again, um, negative implications for your health and well-being as a whole. All right. As we're talking about emotions through a social psychological conversation, we need to remind ourselves that um, social interaction is both something that humans need as part of their life and fulfillment, but it is also something that can cause undue stress, and depending on the social interaction, can elicit all sorts of different emotions. So, despite the fact that social interaction can be a source of stress, it is also something that, as a social scientist, we understand is a necessary human behavior. All right. So there are ways in which we can cope with our negative emotions. Um, and they just gave three, but there are many. Um, you can express those emotions. You can again talk to individuals, have you can do journaling, you can talk to a friend, you can talk to a some kind of social worker or trusted ally or therapist or etc., but allowing yourself the ability to have those feelings and to express them does have a positive um, correlation with better mental health outcomes. You also have creative outlets like art and music, which I strongly suggest. You also can have express emotions through care of other creatures. So, like, there are equine therapies and all sorts of other things where you can work through those emotions in a way with something that is not as socially needy as maybe a human social interaction would feel. You seek social support, right? So this is leaning on your friends, your family, your social groups, um, and or creating your own emotional resilience through, lots of coping strategies. If you need a list of coping strategies, I'm sure I can help. Um, this is something that there are lots of lists out there in your midterm, what's it called, survey. I ask you kind of about your coping skills, and I list a whole bunch so that you can click off some of the things that you do, so that you can see as well that there are things that you do that you unconsciously do as part of your self-regulation or coping. um, and these are things like taking deep breaths, looking at a situation from another point of view. It's grounding work. So what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? Um, it's things like giving yourself space if you need it. So if your social battery is done, your social battery is done. It's allowing yourself that cup of coffee in the morning before the kids get up. It's there are all sorts of self regulation, there's all sorts of coping skills that we choose or not choose to use to allow ourselves and our well-being to be in a better place. There's also a lot of research being done on how um, having positive emotions or attempting to kind of build resistance by trying to stay in a positive framework can have long-term positive impacts on your health. Mostly because if you are going into, like we said, if we're going into a situation in a positive mood, then you are going to react differently to any kind of stress or stimulus or positive or negative emotion that you feel based on how your mood already is. So if your mood is trying to stay in that content or positive space, then you're more likely to have a more positive reaction to that, or maybe not as harsh of a reaction if it's a negative connotation. All right. And again, social connections are incredibly important to our well being. They are part of what make us human, and we need to make sure that we are trying to maintain them. And so, a reminder that isolation, while in small doses can be therapeutic. Isolation from society as a whole is not a good way to deal with stress or negative mental health, as it will create a feedback loop and some maladaptive coping strategies. So, a reminder, social interaction is actually positively linked to well being. And that's all I got for you for chapter 3. So, I hope that you guys have a wonderful week. Again, if you need anything or you have questions, please do not hesitate to ask, and have a great day. Da, da. Da, da, da.